thank you to our sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Build accessible, powerful WordPress forms with Gravity Forms. Flexible tools for creators, developers, and teams of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, Woo. WooCommerce is the open source e-commerce platform built on WordPress, helping merchants worldwide sell, manage, and grow their businesses. Gold sponsors, Ally Web Accessibility. Equalize Digital, websites for everyone. GoDaddy, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Yoast. Silver sponsors, Aardvark, CodeGeek, Your Vision, Our Talent, One Team, Kinetic Iris, Kinsta, Pressable, Second Melody. Bronze sponsors, Nine Planets Hosting, Engage, Draw Attention, Multidots, NerdPress, OSAM Studio, Oz EY, Australian Web Accessibility Initiative, Progress Planner, Quality Logic, Sharp, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Stellar WP, Termageddon, Web Yes.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2025. My name is Chris Hines, and I'm the COO with Equalize Digital. Thank you for joining us for Build for Everyone or Build for No One with Elaine Shannon and Kevin Andrews. Kevin is a certified web accessibility specialist who believes true accessibility is about serving people, not just meeting compliance checkboxes. He brings this genuine, user-first mindset to his work training diverse teams, leading audits, and championing a more inclusive web for everyone. Elaine is a creator and developer who's been working with WordPress since 2007, witnessing its evolution from simple PHP to the modern block editor. She now brings that deep experience to her role on the team maintaining and customizing hundreds of websites for Georgetown University. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Andrews. I'm an IAAP certified web accessibility specialist. That's International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And I have been working as an web accessibility professional for about a decade. I've also been navigating the web with a screen reader for more than 20 years, which means I know what it feels like to be completely ignored by websites that consider accessibility optional. I'm also neurodivergent, which means I process information differently from what society deems typical. In practical terms, that basically means I notice when websites are confusing, inconsistent, or illogical in ways that many users might not even consciously register. But it can make life really frustrating or impossible for some of us. So beyond my personal experience, I'm also in charge of Georgetown University's electronic IT accessibility program. So that's not just about checking boxes or compliance, although there is some compliance stuff. It's also about making sure every piece of digital content, application, every workflow, all the digital stuff are truly usable by the people it's meant to serve. Today, we're going to show you the practical steps to improve accessibility across the board with no excuses, no perfectionism. Elaine will demonstrate developer-focused solutions, but my goal is really to show you why these changes matter from a user's lived perspective.
Hi,
Elaine.
everyone. I'm Elaine Shannon. I work with Kevin on the web services team at Georgetown. I have an invisible disability and some neurodivergence too. I've been building websites for almost 30 years, and I've been using WordPress for about 15 of those years. But this is the only team I've worked on that has had a dedicated accessibility expert. As you can imagine, it's very different to have a full-time screen reader user on your team. If you're ever in a position to influence this on your own team, it's invaluable. But if not, don't give up. We're here to help you learn a few ways to improve the websites you build without having to hire another team member. Moving on to our first slide of content, we have the heading Why This Matters, and a startling statistic that 97% of the top 1 million homepages have accessibility errors, according to the WebA Million 2025 survey.
So accessibility is not a niche concern. 1 in 4 adults in the United States lives with some form of disability, and many more face situational or temporary limitations. So that's anything from bright sunlight washing out your phone screen to a sprained wrist that might prevent the use of a mouse. Websites that ignore these realities are actively frustrating or excluding users. So, as someone who is multiply disabled, I encounter inaccessible websites pretty much every single day. It's not just inconvenient, it's exclusionary and just really annoying. A missing label or a confusing page structure can make an entire website pretty much unusable. So, accessibility improvements don't just help those people, they make life easier for everyone. It's also about dignity and independence. And yeah, it's about doing your job properly.
So, as a developer, when you think about accessibility, it's tempting to just picture a small group of users with very specific needs, like blind people. But the truth is, accessibility benefits everybody. When we make buttons bigger to help users with limited dexterity, we're also making it easier for mobile users to hit the right thing with their thumb. When we design high contrast text, we might be thinking specifically of users with low vision, but that contrast is going to help anyone who's outside on a dim screen in bright sunlight, anyone with failing vision, all sorts of different situations. You might think captions or transcripts are only going to be seen by deaf people, but they also really help people like me who don't process audio as quickly as visual input, and they can be very useful in noisy environments like a coffee shop, even for users who don't have any physical hearing problems. Accessibility is really about universal design, making things work for the widest possible audience. The more accessibility we build in for some users, the more usability we build in for everyone. Moving on in our slides, we have the heading Example 1 skip link, and the text CSStricks.com skip link is invisible.
All right, so I want to show you a website which Elaine just read off, where the skip link exists, but the fun thing about that is it's invisible unless you are using a screen reader, so which is something you might not expect. The site is technically accessible to a one tiny subset of users in this case, in this example, and it's completely useless to everyone else. So this is a perfect example of why accessible only for some is not accessibility. It's tokenism if we think about it and just call it what it is. So when I navigate this page, ironically, the skip link is visible to me, but only to me. It's a perfect example of how treating access as a priority for some users can actually exclude others. So think about the keyboard only sighted user. We talked about that sprained wrist earlier, for example. So it wastes time, it adds frustration, and tells people that the site wasn't really designed for their experience at all. Accessibility is not just a side project or a checkbox. It needs to benefit everyone. So Elaine will now play the video. I'm on the CSS Tricks homepage. That's css-tricks.com. And if I press tab,
CSS Tricks, a website about making websites. Same page link, skip to main content.
You'll see that there's a skip to main content link, but it is only accessible to screen reader users. However, it is the first element to which you tab on the page. The next one
CSS Tricks link.
is the logo, which you actually see visually, but here
skip to main content, same page link,
is the skip to main, which is beneficial for everyone, not just screen reader users. And to show how this works, if I press enter.
8 regions, direct, article, main region, article, link direct, link to the...
So it moves you to the beginning of the main content as implied.
More but breakout group polls, start poll, pause slash stop, pause recording, stop, if yes.
If you've done any front-end development, the odds are that you've probably seen this site. It's a really good resource, so it surprised me that this is how they set it up. This is a great example of assuming which type of users need a certain feature and trying to only make that feature available to those users and nobody else. If you assume that only people with screen readers are going to use a skip link, then making it invisible is basically harmless. But now along comes someone with 20/20 vision who uses keyboard navigation. Maybe that sprained wrist user we were talking about. They tab onto the page, and there's no visual indicator to tell them that there's a skip link here, unless you count the very tiny URL that shows up in some browsers' bottom left corners of the screen. But really, there should be a reasonable sized button, so it's clear that if you hit enter, you'll be able to skip to the content. Adding or fixing a skip link is usually one of the easier things you can do to improve a website, but it makes a big impact. Imagine having to tab all the way through a large navigation menu before you can get down to the content of a page. It's a big time suck. As a developer, one other thing you can do is test out websites with only your keyboard. No mouse, no trackpad. If you get frustrated having to tab endlessly, imagine how a user who can't use a mouse or trackpad to bypass content feels. Experiencing frustration yourself is a great way to build empathy for users and ensure that you make things better for everyone. On our next slide, we have the heading Example 2 Contrast and the text MrFancyPants.com lacks accessible contrast, even though ironically it's full of contrast. It might surprise those of you who can see this website to learn that it actually does not have accessible color contrast. There are some areas here that are great. In the top navigation, white text on a black background is as good as you can get. But further down the page, the quick menu section is where we start to get into trouble. Look at the white text that says pigments on a light cyan button. It's obviously a big challenge to come up with a large palette of button colors where either black or white text will contrast enough to make every button readable, and it seems like they're trying here. But you don't just have to try and guess whether your combinations are accessible. You can paste your colors into WebAIM's color contrast checking tool and find out. So as an example, I'm going to check the pigments button in WebAIM's color contrast checker. And if you just search for WebAIM color contrast checker, it will come up with a couple of different options. I'm using just the plain contrast checker here because we have a little bit of a complex setup with background colors as well as buttons and links. So this is more complicated than just a white background with one color of text and a different color of links. If you had that simpler scenario, their link contrast checker can also check the links versus the body text. But again, in this case, with the complicated backgrounds and things, just going with the contrast checker tool. So I am going to inspect the pigments button in my browser, find its colors. There's the cyan background color. And they do have inputs on the contrast checker for background and foreground. And then I expect this is probably pure white, but I'm just double checking. Yes, it is. So put in that as the foreground value. And as you can see here, as you scroll down the page past where you input the foreground and background color, normal size text fails both AA and AAA standard. Large text and graphical objects also fail. There just isn't enough contrast between the white and the cyan color. Now it does have little sliders underneath each of these, so I can darken and it will continue to update the contrast ratio until we see here large text is now passing even though normal text is not. So let's double check our font size here. We're at 16 pixels, which is not going to be large enough. So I would want to go even a little darker cyan until normal text goes into the passing range. So this much darker cyan provides accessible contrast against white. Of course, the other thing that you can do is say change the text color. So if I go back and paste that same color, here's the hex code for the original cyan. What if I just used black text on that? That also works. So if Mr. Fancy Pants wanted to keep that same exact cyan color, all they need to do is change the text black as they have done on a few of the other light colored buttons, and that is accessible contrast. Another quick and dirty way to test your color contrast is to print out your site in grayscale. You don't necessarily have to fully print a physical page, just printing a grayscale PDF is fine. But when you do this, it really will show you how colors like red and green don't have enough contrast for anyone with color blindness. Kevin, I think you had some more insight on why contrast is important.
Of course. So let's talk about color contrast some more. Low contrast, it's not just a problem for visually impaired or low vision or whatever you want to call them, users. It makes content almost impossible to read in daylight on older screens or for anyone whose eyes aren't at peak performance. Guilty. Think about small text while standing on a crowded train or trying to fill out a form at a doctor's office with harsh lighting, like every doctor's office ever. Poor contrast slows everyone down, not just the targeted users. So strong contrast ensures readability for everyone, and it doesn't take much effort. So choosing the right text and background colors is a simple, practical step that really can prevent exclusion before it even happens. If your site forces me, the ambiguous me, to squint, it's effectively telling me I'm not welcome, even if I'm the only one wearing reading glasses.
On our next slide, we have the heading Example 3 Landmarks with the text harvard.edu includes the word navigation in landmarks.
So some websites love to overlabel these landmarks, and it's just another way to make navigation a headache. So in a second, we'll play a recording of a page uh, where the screen announces navigation, navigation. So it's multiple times in a row, and every time you kind of go through the page, drill down through landmarks, you'll hear the same meaningless label repeated endlessly. A little bit of an exaggeration, but you'll get the point. It adds cognitive load and it slows me down. It turns a simple task like finding the main content into this endurance exercise. It's why accessibility, it's not these arbitrary rules, it's real world usability. So landmarks should guide, they should not really confuse, and they should be clearly labeled. And that benefits everyone, not just folks with assistive technology. So we'll play the video.
More.
I'll go to the Harvard University homepage now.
Task switching. Harvard University. Google Chrome. Harvard.
I'll press R and we'll look at the landmarks.
Link Harvard University. Site notifications navigation region. Search and navigation region.
And as you can hear, it's saying navigation twice. I'll do that one more time.
Search and navigation region.
Search and navigation. I'll do it once more.
Main region. Heading level 2 security and brand navigation region. Website navigation region.
And as you can see, all of these sort of navigation related landmarks have navigation in the title, and it's just redundant. It's more annoying than anything. It's certainly better than nothing, but it's just unnecessary. There's no reason to have navigation appended to the name of a navigation landmark. It will tell a screen reader user if it is marked up correctly as a navigation related landmark. So there's just no need to have navigation in the label.
More button. Pause transcript. Pause record. Stop.
If you are a sighted user like me, there are some little accessibility bookmarklets that can help you see the landmarks on any website. So I just searched for accessibility bookmarklets. In the search results, there are several options. The ones that I like to use are from accessibility-bookmarklets.org. They give you a little overview of how they will look once you're using them. and some installation instructions, but really it's pretty easy. You just grab the one that you want, hover over it with the mouse and click, and I am dragging this up onto my favorites bar in my browser. So I have landmarks, now headings, lists, images, and forms. Now these bookmarklets are just some JavaScript that runs when you click on them. So if I go back to Harvard's homepage and hit my new landmarks bookmarklet, there's little boxes and labels for each of the landmarks. Theirs is not quite as straightforward as some just because they have this pretty transparent header on top of their hero image. So a lot of websites like Mr. Fancy Pants would have their navigation above the main instead of kind of overlaid on top, almost like a transparency. But that looks like it should be fine. Scrolling down the page, everything that you would expect to see in the main landmark is included. And then as we reach the bottom of the page, there's this content info landmark for the footer with a few bits of navigation. Little bit of funky CSS around the navigation, but that shouldn't prevent a screen reader user from being able to tell, hey, these are navigation, this is the main tag, all those sorts of things that's helpful for them. So that's one easy way to inspect either your own website or someone else's. And then past the landmarks, of course, you can check easily and see, okay, the H1 is the first tag on the page, got some H2s further on, so it looks like they are using their heading tags correctly. Can also show any lists that may be on the page. It can highlight images, but not background images, just image tags and forms, which it doesn't look like we have on this particular page. But it's just a nice, easy visual way to check on things and make sure they are how you would expect them to be. The way to fix this problem depends on how your theme and plugins are built. It's really easy if you're using a full site editing theme with a navigation block. You can literally just go into the editor and make sure you do not enter the word navigation in the label. If you have an older theme, you may find you need to add an ARIA label in your codebase and just make sure to leave off that word navigation, so only the automatic one gets read. On our next slide, our heading is Example 4, Semantic Structure, with the text TechCrunch.com uses non-semantic HTML. And for this one, the image is what's important. I have a screenshot of the website up in a web browser. The left, approximately half to 2/3, is showing what's visually seen on the page, the regular front end that any visitor would see. And the right half to a third is the code inspector view. TechCrunch is a big website that presents a lot of information. Whether you're blind or sighted, it's just a lot to take in. But what makes it harder for both people and search engines to parse is it doesn't always use the proper semantic structure. What I mean is, I can look at the website with my eyes, and my eyes tell me that the words top headlines is a heading, and underneath it, there's a list of bulleted items underneath. But unfortunately, if you look on the code view side, what you'll see is top headlines isn't a heading at all. It's actually a strong tag inside a paragraph, inside a div. And the list, unfortunately, isn't a list either. We've got div-itis here with an H3 heading tag. So this website is missing out on a lot of built-in functionality. A screen reader can't tell a user they're looking at a list of 5 items if it's not an HTML list of 5 items. They're just divs. Now, interestingly, the headlines inside of them are headings, so they make it into the outline of the document. But since they're H3s that aren't actually after any other headings on the page, they just get stuck up at the top level of the outline, which I don't think is what they intended. There's also an untitled body, untitled nav if you're looking at the HTML5 outline. because there's no heading element directly under the body or the nav, so the browser doesn't know what they were trying to call those things. Now, the last thing I want to show you today is one more tool that's an easy add-on to most web browser. I'm using Chrome here. I searched for HTML5 Outliner. You can see it appears in the Chrome store, and since I already have this Chrome extension, it shows me a remove button, but if you don't have it yet, there will be an install or add button. What this does is it adds a little icon next to your address bar, and when you click on that icon, it lists out the HTML5 outline of that page. Now, again, TechCrunch is a huge website with a lot of information, so we have a lot of data here. But as I was mentioning, the untitled body, untitled nav is because there's nothing up toward the top of the page that's actually an H1. The first headings are these H3s that appear to be a list, but really aren't. And so it really crunches things up in a different order than they probably want to reflect for anyone using this outline, which could be a screen reader user. It could be somebody who tabs through headings. It could also be a search engine that you want to index your content. Those tags are not quite as magical as they used to be in years past, but they still have some impact on what you're saying is most important and less important and kind of sub items in your outline. So if you keep an eye on this, you can look up and see basically anytime you have a semantic sectioning element, it needs a heading of some kind, even if it's not visible to sighted users. But of course, it's not a great practice to just throw in a bunch of invisible headings just to make this outline look better. So it's one of those situations where you really need to start from the beginning of the design process, incorporating the right headings into the layout, and that will help you to achieve a cleaner HTML5 outline. But this can also be a very handy way. It'll work on any website, so just pull it up. You can see what headings other structures are using. What do you have to say about all this, Kevin?
Well, that sounds fun. So broken, yeah, broken semantic structure, it can, as you can imagine, it can really make websites feel like mazes. So for example, a logo text that reads logo likely is invisible information to me. So when a heading is missing or it's just big, bold, fancy font, that's not a real heading. Um, I can't just skim a page, right? Like the way sighted users can. So being able to go by heading is super helpful. Use real headings. So when lists aren't marked up properly, the content is meaningless to screen reader users. You just hear things vertically, but you don't know that it's a list of things necessarily. So these aren't minor issues. They can really prevent the user, not just myself, from understanding or interacting with content independently. So it's a small effort to fix headings, alt text, and list structures, and it can really drastically improve usability. So if you ignore semantics, right, it's like handing someone a map with half the roads erased. Good luck finding your way.
Moving on to our next slide, we have the heading Our Experience, and we summed this up with the text. There is no one quote unquote typical user, so there's no photo that encapsulates that concept.
All right, so every single day I encounter websites that are a masterclass in frustration. So you want to check the score of a sports game? Good luck. You want to try to figure out COVID statistics if there's even still around and haven't been erased? Sure, if you enjoy guessing. Filling out medical paperwork online can feel like a puzzle designed to make me fail or worse, rip my hair out. Booking a flight or hotel, sometimes you think I was trying to launch a rocket. Doing anything that requires school registration or even basic independence for a lot of people can become a chore with the incorrect or missing markup. So we were talking about headings and landmarks, and that's markup. So these barriers are not just theoretical. They directly affect the dignity and independence for millions of people. And again, not just myself. But here's the kicker. None of this is hard to fix. Buttons need labels, headings need hierarchy, so don't just jump straight to heading 3. Lists need semantic markup, navigation needs structure. Yet somehow the simplest things are overlooked while stakeholders focus on shiny features no one asked for. I don't need perfect, I need usable. And yeah, snark aside, every decision a stakeholder makes can either empower or frustrate the crap out of users like me. It's that simple.
I think as developers, first, it's our responsibility to be aware that most people will need some sort of accessibility feature at some point in their lives. And then there are some people like Kevin, of course, who need those features every day just to be able to go through the basics of daily living. I'm not saying that you could have prevented any of the mistakes you made in the past that made your website hard for people to use. I've done some bad stuff too. But I am saying that now that you know a little more, it's your responsibility to keep learning more and making things better. On our next slide, we have the heading No Perfectionism and the simple text, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Accessibility is not a perfect science. I think we can all agree on that. It's really an iterative process where small improvements, they really compound and they add up into a better experience for everyone. So you don't have to wait for every detail to be perfected before acting. Every fix you make today can remove barriers that will prevent someone from using your site effectively. So done is better than perfect because perfect is often just code for never starting. So accessibility doesn't need to be glamorous, but does need to be it does need to be effective. So think of it as triage, right? You fix the biggest pain points first, and the rest will fall into place, of course, with the right supports.
I think one reason teams hesitate to tackle accessibility is because it feels overwhelming. We have standards like WCAG, but they're so technical, it feels hard to fully understand what they mean and what to actually do to implement them. But anything you improve is an improvement. You don't need to overhaul your site tomorrow, but think about what 1 or 2 things you could tackle this month. If you start with high impact areas like navigation, forms, and color contrast, and you fix 1 or 2 things with every release, over time these all really stack up. Your user experience will be much more inclusive. You can also become an advocate for accessibility throughout the process. You might not be able to add a full-time accessibility expert to your team, but I'll bet you have students or customers with disabilities who would be happy to test out your website in order to help make it better. You can also have your developer team run experiments. Have them use only their keyboard one morning. Have them turn on a colorblind add-on for their browser on another day. Keep reinforcing that accessibility is inclusivity and it benefits everyone. And remember to try to reinforce ROI when you can. Maybe you fix a donation form with a keyboard trap, and suddenly you can accept donations from a whole lot more people. Every little bit helps here, especially when you can get a stakeholder's attention to realize this will benefit them too. On our next slide, we have the heading Build for Everyone and a bullet point list of the things we covered today. Skip link, strong contrast, landmarks, and semantic structure. If you only take away one point today, I hope it's that you can make a difference. Start wherever you can with whatever tools you have. Commit to spending 10 minutes a day testing websites or delving into accessibility resources. That way you're always learning new tricks. As a developer, you should already be constantly scanning for new technologies, so this really shouldn't be anything new. But don't fixate on fancy tools. Often, the most powerful tools a developer has are semantic tags that have been around for years, so browsers have built-in functionality for them. You don't have to spend your time reinventing the wheel. Just style them and move on. Accessibility is about progress, not perfection. If you take even one of these actions this week, you'll be making your website more inclusive. We have come to the end of our slides, and I think we've got some time left for questions.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Kevin, for that wonderful presentation. We do indeed have a good amount of time for some Q&A, so hopefully more folks can enter some questions in the chat. I can say just from reputations and from personal experience with one of our speakers that these two people are incredibly knowledgeable, and the time they're giving you here is incredibly valuable. So please get those questions in if you have questions. All right, so what I'd like to do first, and you have pre-answered these a little bit, but I want to give you all an opportunity to answer verbally as well. One person asked if you see untitled body or MAV, I'm not sure if they meant nav there, when using the HTML5 outline plugin. How do you fix that? And is that missing headings or missing ARIA?
It's missing headings. So anytime you use those fancier HTML5 is really not new. It hasn't been for a while now. But anytime you use those elements, a section or a nav, not just a div, the browser is expecting there to be a heading tag of some kind. Ideally, you're going to have an H1 and then an H2 and so forth, but a heading tag of any kind will fix that, and whatever its contents are, that will be the title instead of that untitled body, untitled nav, untitled section.
Right. And what would you recommend in terms of if we're going to like an accessibility starter kit or something like that for people who are interested in starting off with audits or starting to offer some accessibility services themselves?
If you have no budget, you're being kind of scrappy and you just want to kind of dip your toes in the water and find out some more and start fixing the low-hanging fruit, WebAIM has a tool called Wave that will let you check one individual URL at a time. So obviously that's going to be a bit of a slow process if you have a big site, but if you're inspecting things like navigation and footers, anything site-wide, you also can fix a lot of things just from that one inspection, and you can continue and just manually inspect the next URL, however many you have. So that's a great way to dip your toes in, get started for free. You don't have to sign up for anything. You just download it and start using it or use it in your browser. On the other hand, if you're trying to offer services to clients or really audit something like Georgetown's hundreds of websites, we use tools like Site Improve, or Equalize Digital has a nice tool as well that will automatically spider crawl all your websites and report to you on what the accessibility problems are. A lot of times there's also SEO modules, typos, things like that they'll report on. So it's really easy for you or your content editors to then go in and fix those things. And the other benefit of these automated tools is you also get reporting built in. So you can really show, especially if you're ever involved in litigation or even just wanting to show the ROI of, hey, we've invested all this time, what have we got to show for it? You can show those graphs and charts of here's how much we've improved these different facets.
All right. We have some more questions flowing in now. So Emilio asks, sort of a tricky one, but how could we convince stakeholders these audits matter a lot since they could increase budget and the project timeline?
I can
Stakeholder
take that.
buy-in is just
I
a
was gonna say
tricky, but
Kevin is
yeah, go
perfect
for
for
it,
this one.
Kevin, please.
Can you say the question one more time for me, just to make sure I
Yes.
understood it?
Sort of a tricky one.
Yeah.
But how could we convince stakeholders these audits matter a lot since they could increase budget and the project's timeline?
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can all see and hear me here. Yeah, I would say, I think, if you can get numbers in front of them, leadership wants numbers, right? And I think if you can, there's all sorts of stuff out there. Google is your friend. Not everything on the internet is true, surprisingly, but there are some good data out there about this and how to really, the sort of math on these things and making the business case. So I won't sit there and rehash all that for everyone here, but you know, making the case for we really need this earlier in the process. We call that shifting left. I think it's kind of an overused term or phrase, but if you can get it earlier in the process, looking at it at accessibility in the designs, of course, that's all well and good, but oftentimes that's not the case, right? But if you can make the case to your leadership, as far as it's going to cost us a lot less now if we can get, try to do this proactively rather than now we're getting we a company X or organization X is getting sued and now we have to deal with it. It's going to cost a lot more. And oftentimes then you're trying to retroactively address a bunch of issues. So I really encourage people to do their research. Carl Groves has some really good sort of stuff on this in particular about sort of the ROI of accessibility. So you're not banging your head against the wall and you're not reinventing the wheel because there's a ton of stuff on there already. I hope that helps.
Yeah, super helpful. I want to jump over to Tom Ostrai's question. Sorry if I butchered the last name, Tom. But where can we find people to test websites for accessibility issues? What are some good, reputable sources for that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of companies out there that you know say they do this, and I would be very skeptical of anyone touting, ADA certification that's not real. I've been doing this for a long enough time to know that that's BS. That's not real. If anyone is aware of that, feel free to challenge me on that. But ADA certification, we certify web like it's just not that's not a thing. What I would say is, you really want to get feedback from your users. If we've never heard of our website having accessibility problems. Well, have you provided the channels for that? Have you provided a way for a mechanism by which people can, make their feedback known to you? But as far as actual like companies, again, Google is your friend. I don't endorse one over the other per se, as far as companies, but I think there's a lot of benefit to having real experts who are screen reader users looking at your stuff and paying them for the work because it is a field, it's a specialty like anything else, like development, design, security, that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that people do get disabled users looking at their product, their tool, whatever, and actually compensating them appropriately.
And this is actually a perfect segue, I think, into Sherry Robinson's question. So Sherry asks, what advice would you give to someone who is CPAC? And for anyone in the audience who isn't familiar, that's Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, which is a fairly commonly known certification in the accessibility world. So someone who has that certification but can't get a job due to lack of experience, what advice would you give Sherry?
I would offer to do, some, I would say leverage your connections, leverage your network, who needs accessibility work done. And I would, really talk to them and offer any support or guidance that you can. We all had to start somewhere. I've done, my fair share. I did my fair share, volunteer as it were. And I think, experience, I know for those exams, experience can come in many different forms. So I think, really leveraging your network and your connections, hey, who in my local community, needs some work done, or, if you have development shops, because the web accessibility specialist one is a very technical exam. And so if you, want to really get up on your HTML and your ARIA. Of course, number one rule of ARIA is don't use it, but I would say that's, because it's and this is a really tough market right now to try to even break into the field, because of the current climate, so hostile to it. So leverage your network, leverage your connections. That's probably what I would say to that at this time.
Okay. And I actually have a question, and then hopefully we can get to one more after that. We've got a few minutes still. Both of you have been working in WordPress for a while, and I'm just curious, and hopefully some other people in the audience might be curious about this too, how you're feeling about the general direction of the project in terms of accessibility or just in general.
That's quite a question. Not quite as much of a question as it would have been about a year ago, but I have my doubts about the way the project is run and the way accessibility is sometimes seemed to be valued and other times kind of left as what seems like an optional aspect. So I think one of WordPress's great strengths is it's so customizable. So it is easy to go in, build your own theme, build your plugins, add JavaScript here and there, as we heard from another speaker, to fix things in Divi that we know are not accessible but can become so fairly easily.
All right, wonderful. And looks like we have time for one more. And I thought this one was particularly interesting. So an anonymous attendee asked, Kevin, you specifically mentioned your daily struggles as part of this presentation. And we know that there are a lot of bad experiences out there, but do you have some good sites or good examples that do accessibility really well so that attendees can go and look and see and test and learn what a true proper implementation of accessibility looks like fundamentally?
Yeah. Sorry, I keep getting alerts. I'm not used to the webinar interface. I don't know what they're saying, but yeah, I think a lot of sorry. I would say I think a lot of the bank websites do a really good job. I think, there was sort of a real push, at least here in the States. I'm not sure where all our audience hails from these on this session, but I would say a lot of the banks here in the US have done some really good work, through threats imagined or otherwise of litigation or other reasons, or maybe because they care. I don't really know, to be honest. That's not sarcasm. But I think, the banks do a nice job. The health insurance conglomerates seem to have it together. At least the one that I have, which is a pretty, big one here in the US. So I think looking to those who are really, you know, heavily regulated still, again, for better or worse, still pretty regulated and very much compliance kind of focus. And they really have, they have to really follow these regulations. So I would look at them. Yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Okay, great. And in 60 seconds or less, are there any, and Sharon Rieger asked this, are there any WordPress themes that help get a good start for an accessible website, if you can rapid fire name any you're aware of?
I unfortunately have been building my own for so long now, I'm not as familiar with what's out there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much again for attending this session with Elaine and with Kevin.